They looked at her clothes. Simple, plain, unbranded. Then they looked at her face. And laughed. It wasn't loud at first. Just whispers. Side eyes. That quiet kind of disrespect that pretends to be harmless. She stood there, calm, phone in hand, waiting. Not nervous. Not lost. Just existing. That alone seemed to offend them. One of the boys stepped closer. Too close. "You don't fit in here," he said, smirking. His friends laughed behind him. She tried to move away. They blocked her path. Another voice followed, colder this time. "We don't like your kind around here." People were everywhere. Yet somehow no one noticed. Or worse, they noticed and chose silence. A sudden shove. She lost balance for a second. Then it happened. Fast. Cruel. Humiliating. A knee came forward, striking her as she stumbled. Not to seriously hurt her, but to humiliate her. To show power. The laughter exploded. Her heart raced. Shock froze her body. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. She just stood there, stunned, trying to understand why this was happening. Because nothing about her deserved this. Across the space, a man noticed. He had been watching quietly. Not because he didn't care, but because he was reading everything. The body language. The tone. The fear in his daughter's eyes. Steven Seagal took a step forward. Slow. Controlled. The air shifted. The bullies were too busy laughing to notice him yet. Too confident. Too blinded by ego. They thought this was just another easy target. Another moment where cruelty would go unchecked. They had no idea who she was. More importantly, they had no idea who her father was. And in that moment, as the laughter echoed and phones began to rise in shaky hands, one truth became clear. This wasn't just bullying. This was racism. And it had just crossed a line it would never recover from. It was an ordinary afternoon. The kind of place where people came and went without thinking twice. Conversations blended into noise. Laughter echoed casually. Life moved on. She stood near the edge of the space, scrolling on her phone, waiting. No designer bag. No flashy clothes. Nothing that screamed attention. And that was the problem. To them, silence looked like weakness. Simplicity looked like inferiority. One of the boys noticed her first. "Why is she even here?" he muttered. Another followed his gaze, smirking. "She thinks she belongs." They laughed, not because of something funny, but because mocking someone made them feel important. She felt their eyes on her. She didn't react, didn't look back, didn't engage. That calm made them angrier. "Hey!" one of them called out. She ignored him. That was all it took. They stepped closer. "Did you hear me?" His tone sharpened, demanding attention he didn't deserve. She finally looked up. Not scared. Not arrogant. Just confused. "I'm just waiting," she said quietly. The response came instantly. "This isn't a place for people like you." The words were casual. Practiced. Like he'd said them many times before. She didn't argue. She tried to walk away. They blocked her again. Around them, people noticed. Some slowed down. Some glanced briefly, then looked away. Nobody wanted trouble. Nobody wanted to get involved. That silence fed the bullies. Steven stood a short distance away, watching. He had noticed the looks long before the words. The shift in energy. The way confidence turned into cruelty. He didn't rush in. Not because he wasn't concerned, but because he wanted to understand exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. The boys mistook his distance for absence. "Your parents didn't teach you manners," one sneered. Steven's daughter tightened her grip on her phone. She had faced looks like this before. Whispers. Judgment. But today felt different. More personal. More hostile. One of them laughed loudly. "You should go back to wherever you came from." The sentence landed heavy. A line crossed. Steven stepped forward slightly. Not close enough to interrupt. Close enough to be seen. Still, they didn't notice him. Their focus was on her. On proving dominance. On showing power in front of strangers. Power they never truly had. "What are you gonna do?" one taunted. "Cry." She didn't respond. That silence enraged them. Because racism hates dignity. It hates composure. It hates people who refuse to feel small. Steven exhaled slowly. He already knew how this would end. Not with shouting. Not with chaos. But with truth. And consequences. The laughter didn't stop. It grew. Louder. Sharper. More confident. The boys fed off each other's energy, each one trying to be crueler than the last. Cruelty, to them, was entertainment. One of them leaned closer to her face. "You always act this quiet," he said mockingly. "Or is that fear?" She didn't answer. Not because she didn't have words, but because she refused to give them satisfaction. That silence enraged him. Another boy stepped forward. "You think you're better than us?" He scoffed. "Look at you." He gestured at her clothes. Plain. Ordinary. No brand. No status. No place here. The words were deliberate. Designed to cut. She finally spoke. "I haven't done anything to you." Her voice was calm. Steady. That calm felt like disrespect to them. Racism hates being challenged by dignity. "What did you say?" one snapped. Steven noticed the shift instantly. The posture changed. The smiles hardened. Jokes turned into threats. He moved closer now. Not rushing. Not dramatic. Just present. The boys noticed him this time. They glanced briefly. Then laughed again. "Who's this?" one said. "Her dad." More laughter. Steven stopped a few steps away. "That's enough," he said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just firm. One of the boys turned fully toward him. "You telling us what to do?" He smirked. "You don't look like anyone important." That sentence revealed everything. To them, importance had a look. A uniform. A brand. And Steven didn't fit their narrow definition of power. "You should mind your business," another added. "This doesn't concern you." Steven looked at his daughter first. Her eyes met his. She was shaken, but standing. That mattered. Then he looked back at them. "This ends now," he said. The calm in his voice unsettled them. Racism survives on intimidation, on fear. And Steven wasn't afraid. One of the boys stepped forward again, chest out, ego inflated. "You think you scare us?" He laughed. "You're just another nobody." That word echoed. Nobody. People around them began to notice fully now. Phones were raised. Whispers spread. Something about Steven's stillness felt different. Too controlled. Too composed. The bullies felt it too. And instead of backing down, they doubled down. Because ego hates retreat. One of them scoffed, pointing at Steven's daughter. "She probably thinks she's special." Another added, "Bet she plays the victim everywhere she goes." Steven's jaw tightened, just slightly. Not anger. Resolve. "Apologize," he said. A simple word. The boys burst into laughter again. For what? For telling the truth. The one who had shoved her earlier grinned. "You people always want apologies." That was the moment. Not because of the insult, but because of the certainty behind it. The belief that they were right. That belief is what makes racism dangerous. Steven stepped 1 inch closer. Still no threats. Still no raised voice. "You don't get to decide who belongs," he said. The boy rolled his eyes. "Or what?" he challenged. The crowd held its breath. Steven didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. Because consequences don't announce themselves. They arrive. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in Steven. In the room. The laughter died down. The confidence wavered. People started murmuring. He's too calm. This is getting serious. The bullies felt exposed. Their jokes no longer landed. Their power was slipping. And that terrified them. So they lashed out one last time. Louder, crueler. One boy muttered, "She's lucky we're even talking to her." Steven looked at him, directly. "No," he said quietly. "She's unlucky you showed who you really are." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The kind that forces truth to surface. The boys didn't know it yet. But this was the moment everything changed. The silence didn't break right away. It settled. Thick. Awkward. Unavoidable. Steven stood still, his body relaxed but grounded. No clenched fists. No raised voice. No threats. Just control. His daughter stood beside him now. Not hiding. Not shrinking. Standing. That alone began to change everything. People who had been pretending not to notice suddenly felt exposed. Their eyes shifted. Their posture stiffened. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others glanced at their phones, unsure whether to keep recording or put them away. The bullies felt it too. That uncomfortable feeling when laughter stops landing. When confidence no longer feels safe. When attention turns into judgment. One of the boys cleared his throat, forcing a laugh. "Man, everyone's so sensitive these days," he said. No one laughed with him. The joke fell flat. Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to. The crowd was responding for him. A woman nearby whispered to her friend. This went too far. Another man shook his head slowly. That girl didn't do anything. The bullies exchanged glances. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were used to people backing down. Used to silence. Used to being ignored. But now, eyes were on them. And eyes don't lie. Steven turned his attention fully to his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She took a breath. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. But it was steady. That steadiness hit harder than fear ever could. A phone camera zoomed in. Someone murmured, "She's really calm." Another voice added, "That's strength." The bullies shifted their weight. One of them crossed his arms, trying to look unfazed. "She's acting," he muttered. But his voice lacked confidence now. Steven stood slightly in front of his daughter. Not aggressively. Protectively. A human shield of calm. "You don't need to explain yourself," he said quietly to her. Then he turned to the group. Not angry. Not emotional. Measured. "You had a choice," he said. The sentence landed heavy. "You could have walked past," he continued. "You could have ignored her." The crowd leaned in. Steven wasn't lecturing. He was stating facts. "But you chose to humiliate someone," he said. "In public. No insults. No accusations. Just truth." One of the boys scoffed weakly. "It wasn't that serious." A murmur spread through the crowd. A woman spoke up this time, louder. It was serious enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Heads nodded. Agreement rippled outward. The bullies' power was slipping fast. They weren't in control anymore. Steven didn't smile. He didn't enjoy this. Because real strength doesn't crave humiliation. It seeks accountability. He glanced around the space. "Everyone here saw what happened," he said calmly. Some people nodded. Others looked down, embarrassed. "That means everyone here has a responsibility," he added. That sentence stung. Because now the crowd wasn't innocent either. Silence had been a choice. A choice they were being forced to confront. One man stepped forward slightly. "I saw everything," he said. "She didn't provoke them. That was all it took." Another voice followed. "Same here." Then another. "They were mocking her from the start." The bullies' faces changed. Pale. Tight. They weren't surrounded by victims anymore. They were surrounded by witnesses. Steven said nothing. He let the truth speak for itself. His daughter looked around, surprised. Not at the people speaking up, but at how quickly cruelty collapses when it's exposed to light. One of the boys swallowed hard. "This is getting blown out of proportion," he muttered. Steven finally looked at him again. Not with anger. With disappointment. "That's what people say," he replied, "when they don't want to take responsibility." The sentence cut deep. Because it was undeniable. The crowd shifted again. Someone whispered, "He's right." Another voice said quietly, "They messed up." Security began moving closer now. Not aggressively. Alert. The bullies noticed. Panic flickered behind their forced bravado. Steven placed a hand lightly on his daughter's shoulder. "You handled this with dignity," he told her. She nodded, swallowing emotion. That moment, a calm father protecting his child without violence, changed how everyone saw the situation. This wasn't about dominance. It was about humanity. The bullies no longer looked powerful. They looked small, exposed. And suddenly, the space felt different. Like something irreversible had happened. Because once racism is seen clearly, it can't hide again. The space felt smaller now. Not because people moved closer, but because truth has weight. Security stood nearby, watching. Phones were still raised. Whispers continued, low and uncertain. The bullies tried to regain control. One of them laughed awkwardly, too loud, too forced. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're all acting like this guy is someone important." Steven didn't react. He didn't need to. Because importance doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. A man near the back stared harder at Steven's face. His eyes widened slightly. "Wait," he murmured. He stepped closer. Pulled out his phone. Looked again. His expression changed completely. "That's..." He hesitated, then said it clearly. "That's Steven Seagal." The words didn't explode. They sank. Like a heavy stone dropped into silence. A woman gasped. "No way." Another person whispered, "The actor." Phones shifted instantly. Cameras zoomed in. Faces turned. The bullies froze. "What?" one of them snapped, trying to laugh it off. "That's not him." But doubt had already entered. And doubt destroys arrogance fast. Steven didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. He simply stood there, the same calm, controlled presence he'd had from the start. That calm now meant something different. People started connecting dots. The confidence. The composure. The authority without noise. It made sense now. One of the boys took a step back. "Yo, is that actually him?" Another whispered urgently. "Bro, look it up." A phone screen lit up. Then another. Then another. Faces drained of color. The realization spread faster than fear. Steven looked at them, not victorious. Reflective. "You laughed because you thought she was powerless," he said quietly. His voice cut through the murmurs. "You mocked her because you thought no one would care." No anger. Just truth. One of the boys swallowed hard. "But we didn't know who you were," he said weakly. Steven tilted his head slightly. "That's the point," he replied. The sentence hit harder than anything else that day. The crowd went silent again. "You judged my daughter without knowing anything about her," Steven continued. "And now you want mercy because you recognize me." He paused. "That's not respect," he said. "That's fear." The word lingered. Fear. One of the boys looked down. Another wiped sweat from his forehead. They weren't being attacked. They were being exposed. Steven placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "She doesn't need a famous name to deserve dignity," he said. "She deserved it before you knew who I was." The crowd reacted visibly. Heads nodded. Eyes softened. A woman near the front whispered, "That's powerful." Steven turned back to the boys. "You didn't embarrass her," he said. "You embarrassed yourselves." No insults. No threats. Just consequences delivered with clarity. Security stepped closer now. "Sir," one of them said respectfully, "would you like to file a report?" Steven looked around. At the witnesses. At the cameras. at the young faces now stripped of arrogance. "Yes," he said calmly. "But not for revenge." That caught everyone off guard. "For accountability," he continued. "So this doesn't happen to someone else tomorrow." The boys' shoulders slumped. They finally understood. This wasn't about who Steven Seagal was. It was about who they had chosen to be. And the truth was unavoidable now. Because once racism is revealed, it can never pretend to be a joke again. The atmosphere had changed completely. What began as noise and mockery had turned into something heavier, more serious, more real. Security guided the group of boys a few steps away, separating them from the crowd. No force, no shouting, just firm direction. The boys didn't resist. They couldn't. Not because they were afraid of punishment, but because there was nowhere left to hide. Steven stood with his daughter, calm as ever. The crowd slowly relaxed, but no one left. They wanted to see how this would end. One of the boys finally spoke, his voice low. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." Steven looked at him. "You did," he said quietly. "You just didn't think there would be consequences." That distinction mattered, because intention doesn't erase impact. Security asked the witnesses to stay nearby. Phones lowered slightly, but cameras remained ready. This wasn't a spectacle anymore. It was accountability. A senior security supervisor approached Steven respectfully. "Sir, we'll need statements," he said. "We've reviewed the footage." Steven nodded. "That's fine." He turned to his daughter. "Take a seat," he told her gently. "You don't need to hear everything." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm okay," she said. Her strength showed again. Steven nodded, proud but composed. The boys stood awkwardly. Gone was the laughter. Gone was the bravado. One of them wiped his eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Steven didn't respond immediately, because apologies without understanding mean nothing. "What are you sorry for?" Steven asked calmly. The boy struggled. "For everything," he said. Steven waited. The pause forced honesty. "For judging her," the boy finally admitted. "For thinking we were better." That was the truth. And truth is where change starts. Steven nodded once. "That's a beginning," he said. "But it doesn't undo what happened." The crowd listened closely. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about growth, or the lack of it. Security explained the next steps clearly. The incident would be documented. The footage would be reviewed. Parents would be contacted. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was responsibility. The boys' faces tightened. Reality had arrived. Steven placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder again. "You see this," he said softly to her. "This is what standing your ground looks like." She nodded, eyes glossy but steady. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. "I just want to say," she began, "you handled this with incredible grace." Others murmured agreement. Steven gave a small nod. "Grace shouldn't be rare," he replied. "It should be normal." Those words lingered. Security finished their process. The boys were escorted away. Not in shame, but in silence. Silence that forces reflection. Steven and his daughter prepared to leave. But before they did, Steven turned back to the crowd. "I want everyone here to remember something," he said. The space went quiet again. "Racism doesn't always shout," he continued. "Sometimes it jokes. Sometimes it laughs." Heads nodded. "But it always reveals character." He looked around. "Today, we all had a choice," he said. Some chose silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some chose to speak, he added. Others stood taller. "And one person," he said, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder, "chose dignity." The crowd responded with quiet applause. Not loud, not performative, respectful. Steven turned and walked away with his daughter. No interviews, no statements, just calm steps forward. Justice didn't come with drama. It came with accountability. And that made all the difference. By the time Steven and his daughter disappeared into the distance, the noise of the place returned. People went back to their conversations, to their phones, to their routines. But something had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. Because moments like this don't end when the people leave. They stay. They replay. They make you uncomfortable. They force you to think. Racism isn't always loud. It doesn't always shout slurs, or wear obvious hate. Sometimes it laughs. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind jokes, confidence, or just messing around. But make no mistake, racism is fear. Fear of what you don't understand. Fear of people you can't control. Fear of those who don't fit your narrow idea of value. The boys learned that lesson the hard way. Not because they were punished, but because they were exposed. Exposed to witnesses. Exposed to truth. Exposed to the fact that power doesn't belong to those who humiliate. It belongs to those who stay human. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand respect. And that's the point. Because real power doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength doesn't need permission. And real dignity doesn't disappear just because someone tries to take it away. His daughter didn't fight back. She didn't beg. She didn't shrink. She stood. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching of something important. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need status to deserve respect. You don't need a famous name to matter. Racism thrives on silence. On people looking away. On people telling themselves, "It's not my problem." But that day, silence broke. Someone spoke up. Then another. Then another. And suddenly, cruelty had nowhere to stand. That's how change begins. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with courage. The courage to say, "This isn't okay." The courage to stand beside someone who's being judged. The courage to look at yourself and ask hard questions. Because racism isn't just about bad people. It's about unchecked behavior. It's about small moments that go unchallenged, until they become habits. And habits become harm. So here's the truth this story leaves us with. Never judge someone by their clothes, their skin, their silence. Because you never know who they are, or what they've endured. More importantly, you never know who you're becoming. By how you treat them. Respect isn't earned by appearance. It's owed by humanity. And the strongest people in the room are rarely the loudest ones. They're the calm ones. The steady ones. The ones who choose dignity when others choose cruelty. Speech balloon. If you believe racism has no place in our world, type "No to racism." Round pushpin. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters. Because change doesn't start with power. It starts with people.